Welcome back to the podcast. I am pleased to bring on Jon B. Cooke, editor of TwoMorrow's comic book creator. John, tell the fans your origin story and what got you into comic books in the first place.
I was a regular reader of comic books, Harvey Comics and Lois Lane and all that kind of stuff. Back in the 60s, I liked Dennis the Menace. I liked Gold Key Comics a lot, but everything changed when my mother took the two youngest in the family, including me, to live in Europe. And living in England, I guess it was a byproduct of homesickness, maybe. But in England, you could buy American comics really cheaply. And it was Jack Kirby's Fourth World. I picked up Jimmy Olsen number 133, and my mind was blown. And that was the moment that changed me from a reader to a collector. And that's where it started.
So tell them a little about yourself. What do you do? What you've done?
I was in advertising for a long time. I was an art director, graphic designer, still am. Pretty much work at home now, pretty much exclusively on comics related stuff. I'm a writer, I'm a historian, I'm a designer, layout guy, very closely associated with Tomorrow's, but I also do my own stuff too. That's me.
So you do comic book creator. Why should fans care about creators that aren't in stuff that they buy in the comic book shops every week?
I'm really a historian. I'm somebody who seeks out information about the history of comics, which really fascinate me. It is a very niche thing. So I'm not really trying to appeal to a general readership so much as people who are already predisposed to be interested. So I'm not really trying to persuade anybody. I'm just trying to expose people to life stories, really. My whole mantra always was I used to do a magazine called Comic Book Artist. And I started a mantra with that of it's not about the artifact, it's about the artist. So it's not about the value of the comic book, it's about what a creator has bought. There would be no comics without the creators. And I've always been just very curious about people's lives.
So how long have you been working at Tomorrow's and what were some of the things you've done over the years?
I don't work at Tomorrow's, but I do. We are in a partnership with doing a comic book creator magazine. I first hooked up with Jon back in 1995, I think. It was right after the beginning of Jack Kirby Collector. Literally, it was on the first day that I was on the internet. And the first thing, it was even before Google existed, the first thing I Googled was Jack Kirby being my favorite creator. And I was really annoyed that there was a fanzine that was devoted to Jack Kirby that I did not know about. I was offended by that. So anyway, I immediately sent him an email and offered my services. I had done fanzines before. I was involved in horror fiction fanzine before. So I was capable of, with the advent of desktop publishing, I could make my own magazine by myself with the right software. So I offered my services and we immediately hit it off and we became very tight friends. And to this day, I call him my best friend and I think he says the same.
So how did your first magazine at Tomorrow's come about?
That was the Jack Kirby Collector. I made sure that I did two articles every issue and that there would be issues where I would do all the interviewing in it. And there was a DC issue where I interviewed all the main players who had dealt with Jack Kirby at DC that were still around. And then I would do that for the Marvel issue. And it really just grew from that of, hey, what if there was a Jack Kirby collector for other creators? And initially the idea was to focus on Joe Kubert or Neil Adams or somebody of comparable proficiency as Jack Kirby, which of course there's nobody nearly close. But and it just quickly turned into let's do it by subject. So I wanted to do DC Comics in the late 60s and early 70s, my favorite era. That's when I became a fan. And so that was the first issue and it just became a hit. It was ridiculous. We went into two printings. It just unheard of. And before and since. I struck a nerve, I think, that fans really wanted something like this, and it helped me make a career out of it.
And that magazine got you like four Eisners back in the early 2000s.
Five Eisners for best comics related periodical. I also got a Harvey out of it. So that was fun. I went through a real streak. They were consecutive too, the Eisners. So that was fun. I was hot for a while. And I got a little big for my britches and broke up with TwoMorrows because I wanted more of the profit sharing of it. And there was censorship concerns and issues that were taking place too. But it was really mostly my ego. I ascertained after a period of time. And I was very close with Jon and would be on the phone with him literally all the time. You wouldn't believe, these were back when phone calls actually cost money with long distance phone calls. And you would not believe the phone bills were ridiculous. But then here I'm working for Top Shelf, they were great guys to work with. And I made very good money, but it was very lonely. I didn't have really a partner in the whole kind of thing. So that was a part of going back, and it really wasn't that long. It was about 6 years later. I came back and started doing layout and started rebuilding the relationship. And then the idea came, I was doing the graphic design for Alter Ego. And it's like, why am I putting all this effort? As wonderful as working with Roy is, why am I putting all this effort in if I could do my own again? So we started 12 years ago with a comic book creator.
Why didn't you just decide to go back to comic book artist?
I wanted to do something different. I wanted a change. I wanted to shift the paradigm. I'd already gone through two incarnations of a comic book artist. And if I was wise and utilized my marketing knowledge from advertising, I would have returned to the old name. But I also wanted to be more inclusive. I did not want to be literally just about artists. I wanted to be about writers and editors too. And I needed a change too. I wanted a new beginning, so to speak. And so that's why I did that.
So how's the magazine changed in the 10 plus years since you've been doing it? Has it evolved much?
It's very much evolved in being regular. I have been really very disciplined about coming out. Now we're at a bi-monthly schedule, and we can talk about that in a minute. I'm much more disciplined about it because I think more about the readership. As I get older, it's just an important relationship to have with my readership, and the more regular I am, the more they seem to like it.
So yeah, you went from a quarterly format to a bi-monthly format. How far ahead do you plan these issues out?
I have it mapped out till June of 27. So yeah, I map it out well in advance. I decided because there's two reasons. Dealing with new artists, for one thing, is not necessarily within my wheelhouse with new artists and new creators. As much as I wanted to work with very talented people and focus and showcase on them, it's a different paradigm since the internet really rose up, and that print, I don't know quite understand it. For there's so many creators who work in the print medium of comics, periodicals, and they're not really clamoring to be in print to be covered themselves. Or maybe it's the way, I don't know. I really don't know. I don't know how to reach them. I'm not really savvy with social media, and I don't really I choose not to be. So it's a different, I hope I'm not using the word too much. It's a different paradigm. It's just a different way than it was in the early aughts in the late 90s. How is it different? Again, why am I suddenly bi-monthly? Me and Jon decided, I guess what I was leading into was that what my readers want, I do believe, is they want the good old stuff, the good old classic material. I'm devoting a good chunk of the output of CBC to classic creators. I got Jon B coming up, Carmine Infantino, Gene Colan, Len Wein. I just finished up Dave Stevens, and it's just tried and true. But I still want to maintain an interest in it. So the other features within the magazine are going to be very eclectic and just from different eras and all that kind of stuff.
Sometimes there's like overlap between the different publications they put out. How do you find the balance of not repeating yourself and coming up with fresh stuff?
I'm not really, I don't, I leave it to Jon to tell me what the other magazines are doing. Coming up with fresh stuff. Yeah, I guess it's the way I do it. For instance, like right now, I named a bunch of names of people who already passed away. I think every single one that I mentioned are passed away. There's still material out there in one way. My associate editor is working on an issue devoted to Al Williamson. And one way to deal with that is what I just dealt with the Dave Stevens issue, which is to get tributes out of people, have any number of people who knew them, family members, associates, and all that, to talk about them. And that you can build an issue out of that, as well as whatever. I had unpublished interviews with Dave Stevens that I had conducted with Dave. And so I'm able to put them in the magazine, for instance. I can make things fresh, even though the subject is deceased. It's just a matter of focus.
Do you try to balance between the cover story between somebody that's more popular versus somebody that's possibly dead? Because you had Dan Jerkins on the cover feature on one thing, and you had, I think, Steve Englehart on another. Is there something like commercial that you try to, I'm just going to throw whatever I want and don't care about the commercialization of it?
No, it's every time I try to do something that I like, it very often it's met with ambivalence, according to the sales figures. Nothing really fluctuates it doesn't get too low or too high in a way. Certainly the numbers are nowhere near what they were in the early 70s, early aughts, in the early 2000s. But it's a complete different scene now. But it doesn't wildly fluctuate, but it's enough to know, to recognize that if I do a Jon B issue, the numbers are simply going to be better. And this is a part of me, even though I'm retired from advertising pretty much, I still need to make some money. It still needs to pay for itself. And another thing I wanted to talk about before is like, why am I going bi-monthly? It's also technology. It's just amazing. There's now AI transcribing program that is just astonishing. And I'm able to transcribe way quicker than real time. But nonetheless, that's opened up my productivity enormously. And it's also hooking up with any number of people who have a lot of. There's Ken Gale, who had a radio show throughout the 90s and into the early aughts of any number of very popular creators and all that. And so I have access to, with his permission, to make transcriptions of these radio shows, which are just fascinating. I did it with the Steve Gerber issue, for instance, and seemed to be well received. Or nobody's complaining.
So what's coming in the future for Comic Book Collector and you in general in the next few months?
But I've got a book. I've got the history of Last Gasp. I'm almost done with it. This is a proof that Ron Turner, the publisher, has made his corrections on, and I have to make all the corrections on that. Literally, that's over 600 pages of my part, 600 pages of a history of an underground comics company. I'm working on a companion to this companion, the Pacific Comics Companion. I'm doing the first Comics Companion right
Which
now. And I just finished the Dave Stevens double-size issue, which it's a book also. And so that's been finished. I'm literally working on books on Treasure Chest Comics, which is a Catholic comic book that came out from the 1940s to the 1970s. I'm working on a history of World War III Illustrated, which is an annual comic book that comes out of New York. That's by a bunch of radical comic book artists and creators, which has always fascinated me. They've been coming out since 1980. So I'm doing a history. I ain't going to make a dime from it, but I'm really fascinated with that. I'm not going to make a dime from the treasure chest either, but boy, do I have the story on that. And I got something on heavy metal and the history of heavy metal that will also constitute the other, like Epic Illustrated and the other knockoff magazines that took place there. So I'm really booked for the next 10 years with all this stuff. And so here's hoping.
So one day, when fans are looking back, what do you hope your contribution to as a historian and publisher might be one day?
That I left behind a body of primary source material. For instance, like there was the book Marvel Comics: The Untold Story that came out that Sean Howe did. And if you look in the back of the footnotes, the references, there's a ton of stuff that's me from interviews that I did and all stuff. And I would get reactions from people saying, doesn't that annoy you? Doesn't that piss you off? And no, it's a point of pride that I was able to talk to any number of these people doing really usually very thorough interviews and life spanning, talking about from their childhood, even talking about their ancestors and things like that nobody else has ever done, that I hope will be mined for generations to come of people who are interested, because that's a historian's responsibility to create this primary source material that can be of use to future historians, because boy, do I respect all the work that's come out of the Comics Journal and David Anthony Kraft and the Comics Interview and all the stuff that I rely on for the secondary sources that I use.
If a fan isn't checking out Comic Book Creator, why should they?
It's a good magazine. I really pour my all into it. I think it's engaging. I think it's very eclectic. You can find in any given issue. There's something on underground comics. There's something on kitty comics. There's something on almost always quality comics. I got articles coming up on Congolese comics. I've got Shari Flanagan of the Air Pirates. I got Steve Willis, who's the master of mini comics. I've got always try to put something in there from the 70s because that's my bailiwick, so to speak. So I got a thing on the Esquire magazine, came out with this thing in 72 about all these different heroes that Bernie Wrightson did, and Ralph Reese and Barry Windsor Smith, Jeffrey Jones. And so I talked to Alan Weiss all about it and got a really interesting little story like that. I was speaking with Elaine Lee yesterday and earlier this week, doing extensive interview about Starstruck, which was the comic book that she did with Michael William Kaluta, that started off as a stage play. And since I did the definitive history of Warp, the science fiction play that was comic book inspired, I might as well follow up with Starstruck. So there you go. I got lots of stuff.
Jon B. Cooke, comic book collector from TwoMorrow Publishing. Thank you for joining me for this taping.
Thank you.
All right.